I'm going to talk about the new SOP flip in Houdini 19.5. It was a little bit, it was touched on, right? Magdalena and Nikita talked about it a bit earlier, but I'm going to give you like a little bit more comprehensive overview of what it is, what it can do. And so Houdini has a flip solver and can create like a really nice fluid simulation, but it can be a bit intimidating, right? So, and previously, if you click on the shelf tool to create a wave tank, you got a ocean simulation, but the setup is a bit complicated, right? It's like across 3 different contexts, loads of different like networks, and they talk to each other through expressions, and it's a bit complicated to get your head around it, especially as a beginner. So like really the idea of turning all the DOP setups right into SOPs is to really simplify it. It's much more intuitive. So this setup now in SOP world looks like this. So hopefully it's much easier. It's in one place. It's just few nodes. So yeah, hopefully the difference is nice. So yeah, the overview is really the main goal of SOP flip was to simplify the whole workflow. There are a few new features, but yeah, as we have a Pyro, RBD, and Vellum in SOPs, then like the flip solver was the last dynamic solver which was not living in SOPs. And yeah, and so like the whole workflow for flip now in SOPs consists only of 4 nodes. The flip container, which kind of defines usually where you want to run the simulation. The flip boundary is used usually for sources and things. Flip collision creates collision objects, and a flip solver runs the simulation. And so here's a fun little simulation, and you can see the setup here. So the best way, I guess, to kind of get you started with a SOP flip is with the flip configure tools. So we have created a bunch of configure tab commands for you. So I think like the two which I find like the most fun is the flip configure lava and flip configure flip. They show you how to run like viscous fluids, how to create temperature, how to source temperature, or how to create a fluid with custom color and stuff like that. Then of course we have, similar to the shelf tools, we have ocean tools, so you can easily create just like a tank with waves or a beach simulation. And then probably like the most complicated setup is similar to the guided ocean layer as lives as a shelf tool. So now we have the configure ocean layer, which kind of creates just a thin layer of flip simulation around like the FFT ocean. Right. So let's go over the 4 main nodes, and I'll tell you what they're used for. So the first one, the flip container. This is the place where you set your resolution for your simulation. And another main role of the flip container is it defines where you run your simulation. So by default, if you do not, it has 1 input. If it doesn't have an input, you run the simulation in a box, and you can set it with some parameters. But if you provide a geometry, then you run your simulation inside of this geometry. So you can say, I want to run my simulation only in a sphere, and then when the fluid kind of escapes the sphere, it's get deleted. And you can do really cool stuff with it. You maybe have seen some of it during the launch. So this is like really cool simulation by Igor. Here on the top, you can see a low resolution simulation where you have like these 3 boats running around. And then what you can do, you can create like a custom domain which just follows each boat, and you can run much higher simulation around it, and then you can stitch these simulations together. Here is another simulation, and look mostly here. And you can see that the flip simulation is running only around the rocks and around the boat. So it's like you don't have to simulate the whole ocean, but yeah. So we get nice splashes only around the rocks and the boat where it kind of matters. So the next role of the flip container node is where you define kind of the physical properties. So you can set your density, turn on surface tension or viscosity. You can turn on the additional attributes like age, rest, and stuff. And you can also set up custom new attributes. So for example, if you look at the configure lava tool, there it has a custom attribute temperature, and the configure flip has a custom attribute color. Yeah, and like the nice thing that it's a bit of a, you need to keep in mind that if you want to do like a custom attributes, you need to set them on the flip container. But the nice thing is that by default, it works flawlessly with narrowband. So you don't have to worry how to source these attributes inside of the volume and how to source it for the particles. It gets done automatically. So here in the simulation, I have like two sources creating different density fluid, and you can see it behaves as you would expect. So the next node is a flip boundary, which, as I mentioned, is mainly used for creating sources and sinks. So here at the top, you provide a type, and either it's a source, then it creates fluid, or if it's a sink, then it deletes fluid. And then there is this boundary option, that's why it has this name. And it has three modes: none, velocity, and pressure. And it tells you what is done with the fluid at the boundary of the source. So if none, then you're not doing any special handling, and it kind of behaves as an old flip source, as you are used to. If you set it to velocity, then you're prescribing the velocity at the source. And if you set it to pressure, then you're prescribing a pressure. So why this might be useful, there is like a very common question on the forum: how do you fill a cup? So if you use the standard flip source, you get this problem that the cup just fills up to the source, and it doesn't want to fill up more. If you set the source to like a constant velocity where you just pour constant fluid, then you just fill the cup completely. But for example, the pressure source now allows you to set the pressure such that the pressure can only hold certain column of water above it. So the cup gets filled, but like once you reach the prescribed height, the source doesn't have any more like force to push more. Like, you know. So the pressure source is kind of a new thing. To give you an idea why it might be useful, in my cases, the pressure source is usually creates more lively simulations. And here's another quite fun simulation. I took the ocean simulation and I give it a little bit of initial spin, and in the middle I create a sink with extremely negative pressure. So I think I put like minus 50 atmospheres, and the water gets kind of naturally sucked in, and you get a nice whirlpool, which gets maintained. Okay, just a little bit about the node itself. So it has this input where you provide what you want to source, and there are more or less like two main ways how you can specify a source. Either you do it with the geometry, so like a polygon mesh, and you specify the additional attributes like a temperature and things as a point attribute. The other option is that you specify the source as an SDF volume, and you can also specify the other attributes as volumes. So here, yeah, I just took a sphere, converted it into surface VDB, and then I just created temperature as a noise, like volumetric noise. Just a bit of a warning. The UI for the sourcing, it has only, there is more or less like no UI for all these additional attributes. It's all done through the point attributes or the volumes. So but the only thing you need to do, you need to kind of like specify that you want to source temperature on the container. If you do not specify it, then it will not get picked up by the flip boundary node. So yeah, the third node is a flip collide. There is not much to say about it. It creates a collision objects, and like the traditional caveats for collision objects for flip, you have to be careful because the collisions are kind of resolved on the volumetric level. So if you have a cup, for example, you need to make sure that the cup is at least like 2, maybe 3 voxels thick. Otherwise, the cup will not hold the fluid and it will just all drain. Right, and the last node is the flip solver, which just runs the simulation itself. And yeah, you get like a standard solver settings. You can set substeps, cache, and you can also override the simulation resolution. But the primary place where you want to set up your resolution of the sim is the container. Why do you have the override for the resolution here? Is that sometimes you might want to cache out all the collision objects and stuff like that, and then you might want to run the simulation with the cached out like collision objects at the different resolution just to test it out. So you have the option to run the simulation at the different resolution here, but yeah, like the idea is that you most likely want to change your resolution on the flip container. Another option is to turn on waterline. And then you have a bunch of other options like reseeding. You can do particle separation and more advanced kind of solver settings like adaptivity, and you can turn on and off a narrow band there. So another feature of the flip solver is that if you double click it, it has a dive target. So if you double click on it, you will see this stop. You will see these 3 output nodes, and it takes you into DOP network. And you see these 3 output nodes, and they are more or less, they're directly connecting to the 3 inputs on the flip solver in the DOP network. So you're probably familiar that like the first one kind of you can apply their forces on the particles. Here you can apply like the forces on the volumes, and here you can do some kind of additional stuff post sourcing, and yeah, so this allows you to directly do like the traditional DOP workflow you might be used to. And as an example is the configured lava, which turns the temperature into viscosity. And so if you want to have a look like for a very simple example, you can create like, you just run the flip configured lava example and you can see it. All right, so the next thing is the flip solver has a 4th input. And what this is used for is to set initial state for your simulation and also to define what's happening at the boundaries. So this is used for the ocean tools where you specify the waves and the boundaries. And what it can also be used for upressing. So what you here in the gray box, you have a low resolution simulation. So in this, it will be the whole river. In the blue box, you have the high resolution simulation where this domain is just a box following the truck. And what you do, you take the low resolution simulation and you just feed it into high resolution simulation. So now at the boundary of this small box, you're more or less prescribing what is exactly happening in this big simulation. And hopefully the smaller, higher resolution simulation will then match what's happening on the larger simulation. So here's an example. Of course, like in this case, it's not going to match perfectly because the track wasn't there previously. So yeah, you cannot really expect it's going to match perfectly. But if you do some reasonable blending, you might get a nice result. So yeah, and with the boundary, similar to the sources where you had the option to set it as a velocity or as a pressure, with the boundary, now you can also set it if you want to kind of enforce the boundary as a velocity or as a pressure. And why you might want to do it. So here's an example of a boat going on a calm ocean. And if you set the boundary condition to velocity, so here the ocean is completely calm. So everywhere at the boundary of the simulation box, you would set the velocity to 0. The problem is at the bottom of the simulation, the velocity would be 0. So the water cannot actually go under the boat. It has to go around. And this is a consequence of creating this kind of unnatural bulge. But with the pressure boundaries, the water can naturally flow under the boat, and yeah, you don't get any unnatural bulge. So yeah, you can get like a nicer result. But yeah, it's up to you to experiment with it and see what works best in your use case. So I'll show you a short demo to kind of hopefully demonstrate how easy it is to set up like a little bit more complicated simulations. So the idea is to create a uppressing simulation. So I have the whirlpool simulation you've seen before here in gray, and then I will kind of advect the rubber toy around it, and then run high resolution simulation around the rubber toy. So here is the low resolution simulation, close up, and I just advect it from the velocity of the rubber toy. The rubber toy does not interact with the water at this moment at all. All right. So here's the simulation. In the big box is the flip simulation. It's more or less like the flip configure wave tank. And in the smaller box is just a simple solver which advects the point by the velocity field, and then you just copy the rubber toy to that point. So we want to run the high resolution simulation around the rubber toys. So I create a sphere, and then copy it into that point. Just make the sphere a little bit bigger. So now we have the sphere. It kind of follows nicely the rubber toy. And we'll run the simulation at much higher resolution only inside of this sphere. And to do a flip simulation now, so you have to start with the flip container. And you wire the sphere into the input of the flip container to define where you want to run the simulation. Of course, to run the simulation, you need to create a flip solver. And to enforce at the boundary the low resolution simulation, you just take the output out of the previous flip solver and just wire it into the new flip solver. And what is important are these two fields, is the surface field and the velocity field, volumes. All the other geometry is not important. And so just in case here I delete everything, I just keep the surface and the velocity volumes. Right? So I have just these volumes. And yeah, now when I evaluate the flip solver, you can see that I have a part of the whirlpool. Here is the, just modify the visualization. And comparison, you can see the low-res simulation. And here is the high-res simulation. Well, just the initial state of it. So at this point also one thing, because now you have an option to either enforce the boundary as a pressure-based or velocity-based, but I didn't cache out pressure at all from the low-res simulation. So I cannot use the pressure-based, like everything would just drop, the simulation would be useless. So I have to switch to the velocity-driven boundaries. And the last thing needs to be done is to create a collision object to make the rubber toy actually interact with the simulation. So it's the flip collision node, and you just simply wire it. And so now the rubber toy is interacting with the fluid. And when you run the simulation, this is the result. So in the gray is the old simulation, and in the colors, you have the high resolution simulation. Oops. Oh, yeah, that's all.
Turning this off. Okay.
That upres workflow, before you brought in the collider object into the flip solver for the upres, is there any resimming happening at that point when you bring the output of the low res into the fourth input of the flip solver that you're trying to upres? Does that make sense? Like, it wasn't clear to me if because the simulation already happened in the low res, right? And you cached it out. And then you just brought that into a new flip solver. And then upres it there. So is there a new sim happening in that that second flip solver?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
That boundary, right? You have a new boundary for the upres sim.
Can we just
So the boundary condition that you're setting for your upres sim, if particles splash out of that, are they being killed off?
Yes.
So that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, right now, when they fly off, we kind of enforce from the low resolution simulation, we kind of enforce where the fluid is and where the air is not.
Right.
So yeah, definitely we might add kind of detect splashes, because what you might not want, because the high resolution simulation would create splashes and they would get deleted.
Right.
That's what's happening right now.
Awesome. Very cool.
That's true. Encouraging in there. It doesn't get. Yeah. You just animate the geometry.
Totally. So you can speed it up as well.
Yeah. Well, that's what I did, right? But it made the geometry.
Tomáš, can you repeat that? Your mic is dying, so we're gonna switch your mic.
Oh, what happened? Oh, so the question was that right now with the upres sim, the particles, when they fly off, they get deleted. So the idea is you could kind of make the domain in the air phase a bit larger, such that the particles do not fly off. And then there was also a question about if the domain can be animated, and perfectly it can be animated. Like here in this example is exactly, you can see it's animated. It's moved around, but it's animated geometry, so you could run point noise or something. It doesn't matter.
I have a question on the pressure boundaries.
Yes.
So you were saying, for example, when you specify the pressure boundaries earlier, you mentioned something about hydrostatic pressure boundaries, but you also mentioned that you can manually specify those pressure boundaries. Like how, for example, you mentioned that you could specify the minus 50 atmospheric pressure at the whirlpool, for example.
Yes. So you can use the source node for sourcing, and there you can prescribe pressure.
But meaning that then I would supply a field, essentially, like a pressure field, and I specify my own pressure boundary, so to say.
Yeah. So you can either specify as a point attribute or a volume, but then also in the boundary, right? So you can prescribe the pressure also at the boundary case. So you supply it as a fourth input to the flip solver, and there you can also. So if you use waterline, which kind of creates implicitly for you the boundaries data, which you usually provide through the fourth input, there I would initialize. There, internally, we initialize hydrostatic pressure
from the gravity condition that you had on the initialize node, essentially.
Once again.
No. I think I see what you're saying. Because you're saying you initialize like hydrostatic boundaries from the gravity specified on the flip container or on the first node, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But for example, in the ocean case, you can on the ocean evaluate now has also a tick box to create pressure volume. So you can the ocean evaluate can create a surface field, surface volume, velocity volume, and pressure volume, and this can be all feeded into the flip solver. And then if you create the pressure, you can use pressure boundary conditions.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Cool, thanks.
I'm curious, for meshing after the uprest, do you combine them into one kind of universal larger high-res VDP volume, or you kind of stitch them together afterwards?
So right now we have no tools for that. Yeah, I definitely think, yeah, like we kind of provide you tool to kind of, yeah, cool, you can create uprest, but then we don't give you any tools to stage the meshes together. Yeah, that's definitely one thing I want to look into.
Hi. The slide from the presentation where you had the boats going around in a circle and then you mesh them together into a single, is it a single mesh afterwards? Similar to, yeah. You can combine all the domains into just one big one to mesh it afterwards. Is that right?
So this is like a custom setup to actually generate the mesh. It's a custom setup. It's very similar to the previous question. Yeah, like right now we don't have any off-the-shelf tools for that. Yeah.
So sorry, can you, in the example above then, so when you have the domain following all the ships.
Yes.
How do they interact with each other when they combine? Or are they not? Because not in this example, but on the presentation, they have another boat going through and it interacts with all the previous simulations as well.
You mean this one?
No.
Oh,
sorry, I do apologize. I thought I saw another boat come in onto that one, but it was on the launch. There was the top one, but then they had a couple of boats come in. The side.
Oh, like you had the two rubber toys kind of going against each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is just one flip simulation, and sorry. Well, so in that, yeah. Now I know which simulation you're talking about, and the exact question about that simulation.
I think you said it was just one simulation. I just wondered how they combined, because they seem to interact with each other, even though they've been cached separately.
No. It's really just one simulation. It's just this. It's separated kind of into two parts, but that's really not a problem.
Okay. Thank you.
So it's more or less like very similar here. Here, this is just one flip simulation. But the domain is separated into multiple chunks. But when these pieces connect, like it's suddenly just one kind of continuous flip simulation. So everything kind of interacts together naturally, as you would expect.
I think that's what I was asking.
Yeah. But here you are not simulating the rocks separately, and then the other rock separately, and the rows separately. Everything runs in one run.
I will try to ask Igor Janitz to do some sort of explanation about this, but we'll see about that. Does anyone have any other questions? If not, 3, 2, 1, it's a wrap. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Tomáš.